It's been a tough few years for bookstores. Sales tanked in 2020 following years of decline between 2008 and 2019, according to the Federal Reserve. Now, headwinds from the likes of Amazon, the emergence of e-commerce, and the COVID-19 pandemic weighed heavy on the industry. Enter Barnes & Noble, one of the oldest book retailers in the United States. Now, the company is reinventing and revamping its business to dodge the pitfalls threatening bookstores. So how does the company continue its quest for growth? Well, let's bring in Barnes & Noble's CEO, James Daunt, to discuss more. Welcome to the show, James. So talk about how Barnes & Noble is revamping and restructuring to really meet the needs of today's book lovers and consumers.
Really by being very, very old-fashioned and backing the principle that if you run a very good bookstore, people will come into it. And the better that bookstore is and the more focused it is on books, the more customers you'll have and the better you'll do. It's sort of helpful that we're also investing in the stores, making them more beautiful. But it's really about the booksellers within them and giving them the freedom to curate their stores in an interesting way.
So talk about that, because so for people who haven't been into a Barnes & Noble, who sort of had really converted online, what should they expect now versus the Barnes & Noble that they used to know, say, pre-Amazon and pre-pandemic?
I think pre-pandemic, it was sort of very much a pilot high type of retailer and trying to run the same bookstore everywhere, really as most conventional retailers try to do. And that works if you're selling sneakers or clothes or you're a pharmacy chain, but a bookstore should be very reflective of its local customer base and the community in which it sits. And the people who can judge that, I've always felt, are the booksellers. So we've given them a real freedom to do that. Also, you will find plenty of things that we believe sit alongside books very nicely: educational toys, greetings cards, wrapping paper, those kind of things. But you're not going to find any more what did rather dominate the stores in the past, which is all just stuff we hoped to sell. And that all of that's gone now. And I think we've cleaned it up. We've made it much more enticing, much more interesting to be in. And given, as I say, this sort of autonomy to the booksellers to really run their stores as intelligently as they're able.
So when you look at the sort of consumer spending that you're seeing on books now, especially as people tightening their purse strings at the moment during inflation and trying to look for perhaps other sort of resellers looking for cheaper options here, how is Barnes & Noble managing things like discounting and pricing to keep consumers coming in?
Well, I come from actually an independent bookstore background. That's where I started out. And as an independent bookseller, you're in quite a tough space. As a very large bookseller, we can afford to do a lot of discounting, the multi-buys, buy one, get the half price, and all of those things. But really, at the end of the day, it's about creating enticing spaces, and books are very good value, certainly very good value compared to most other ways in which people spend their leisure time. It's much more expensive to go to the movies, certainly a lot more expensive to go to restaurants and the like. So books are very good value, and we've had this tremendous upsurge of reading during the pandemic, and that's been sustained post-pandemic. So books are very, very popular at the moment.
Now, I do want to ask about some of the headwinds that we're seeing here. I mean, 2023 has been a year for labor unions. We have seen that push. Barnes & Noble not exempt from that push as well. How are you managing sort of helping employees and booksellers with the cost of living, while also keeping in mind people are pulling back on some of their spending, or perhaps down spending, or perhaps looking for cheaper alternatives?
Well, we're lucky because our sales are continuing to rise. And I think as long as we continue to offer better bookstores, the sales will hopefully keep on increasing as we increase our sales. And it's how then responsibly and sensibly we use that profit. Part of it is on improving the business. Part of it is on opening new stores. But a large part of it has to be on pay for our employees, the booksellers who are driving this. And it's trying to create a balance between the competing demands, all of which are very important to drive a business forward. But pay is very important. And as you say, quite rightly, there's a demand from those at the lower end of the scale to have more.
And so as you look at some of the other trends, we talked about labor unions, but also changing consumers. You can't think about marketing and advertising without thinking about social media, and of course, TikTok, very prominent. When you're taking this neighborhood approach to bookstores, How are you gauging sort of that content, drawing perhaps new customers into the line, but also gauging how you're tracking that, how you're able to predict some of these trends as well, especially going into the holidays?
Well, I think we're sort of, again, counterintuitively, where we've pulled back entirely from trying to do it from a central perspective. I think doing it from New York City makes very little sense if you're running stores all over the country. But what we have done is empower the local booksellers in each individual store to run its own social media platforms, to engage, be it Instagram, Pinterest, as you say, TikTok, whichever, and indeed probably all of those, and to do so in a way that is sort of sensible and engaging for the local community. Luckily, we employ lots of young people, and they're dramatically better at doing it than people with grey hair like me. And it has been actually successful for us, but very varied, very inventive, sometimes very funny, and helpfully so far only very occasionally getting us into trouble. But it is not trying to control it corporately. It's just let it roll.
And James, I have to ask you, what are you reading at the moment?
Oh, I'm always reading. I belatedly and have just finished the Heaven and Earth grocery store, the James McBride, which I absolutely recommend to everybody. It is the most fantastic novel. They come along, every few years, and we've got a wonderful one. And it is one of our books of the year. The Wager, which you have up there, is also a really, really good read. Grisham I haven't got to yet.